James Hawthorne. The jury found you liable for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with prospective economic advantage. After hearing the evidence and the testimony, I am convinced they reached the correct verdict. So ordered.
In the modern mythology of success, there are no villains, only high-vibration entrepreneurs who manifest their destiny. Tara Hawthorne, better known to the world as the Wellness Queen, was the high priestess of this doctrine. Her digital empire, built on perfectly filtered photos, motivational sound bites, and a curated vulnerability, was worth north of $50 million. Her brand was trust. Her product was perfection. I was the person who kept the whole immaculate machine from shaking itself apart. For 3 years, I was Tara's executive assistant, and my corner office was a gilded cage. When I first took the job, I saw it as the ultimate opportunity. I was 23, fresh out of a competitive communications program, and saddled with over $80,000 in student debt. The salary Tara offered was more than both my parents' combined income. It felt like salvation, a golden ticket. The job description, which I later realized I had written, promised fast-paced growth, creative freedom, and a direct hand in building a global wellness movement. I was ambitious, I was eager to prove my worth, and I was utterly naive to the difference between a brand and a human being. Tara, a master of reading people, didn't just see my ambition, she saw my desperation. She saw someone who would work 80-hour weeks without complaint, someone who would mistake proximity to fame for actual progress, someone who would gratefully accept the scraps from her table. The work started immediately and consumed my entire life. I learned with jarring speed that Tara's life operated on the schedule of an impossible, anxious tyrant. There were no weekends, no holidays, and zero boundaries. My phone was permanently active, an electronic leash tethered to her every whim, vibrating with a constant, low-level panic. The 2 a.m. texts weren't emergencies. They were creative epiphanies, usually a panic demand to change the hex code of a font color on an Instagram post, scheduled for the following day. A shade of beige she suddenly felt was vibrationally misaligned. I quickly understood that her concept of wellnesses was strictly for public consumption. Behind the camera, her reality was fueled by desperation, processed sugars, screaming matches with her finance team, and a terrifying, all-consuming addiction to absolute control. The cruelty was never loud, which made it so much more insidious. It was soft, passive-aggressive, and designed to induce complete dependency. If I made a mistake, such as failing to secure a specific obscure vegan catering option for a sponsored event, she wouldn't yell. She would sigh dramatically, her hand on her temple, and lament that I had thrown off her vibrational code, causing a 5-figure financial loss. The blame was always escalated, framed not as a simple professional error, but as a moral failure, a breach of her personal philosophy. This tactic made me desperate for her approval, constantly striving to anticipate her next impossible demand. I handled every crisis, from failed shipments of her $80 vibrational tonics to legal threats from rival influencers whom Tara had publicly slandered in her Authentics live stream. I was her shield, filtering the ugly reality so the perfect, profitable Tara could remain untouched. The emotional manipulation was exhausting. She would swing between praising me as her savior for pulling an all-nighter to fix a $1 million contract, and then the next day, publicly undermining my competence in front of her other staff, asking me if I even understood the brand's core mission when I misspelled a word in an internal email. I was constantly walking on eggshells. I realized early on, perhaps 6 months in, that in Tara's world, documentation was the only defense against her eventual betrayal. I began saving everything, every abusive text, every unreasonable demand, every email where she contradicted a previous order. It wasn't malice on my part, it was self-preservation. It was the moment I stopped seeing myself as her partner and started seeing myself as her employee, and potentially her future victim. The profound power of the modern influencer rests on the parasocial contract, the cultivated, deliberate illusion of intimacy that makes millions of people believe the person on the screen is their trusted friend. Tara's followers, her tribe, believed her smile was genuine and her struggles were authentic. They bought her $200 gratitude journals and her $80 vibrational tonics because they believed she cared about them. But my proximity gave me the keys to the engine room. I knew her financial vulnerabilities. I knew her cosmetic secrets. The procedures she claimed were just good sleep. I knew her profound reliance on ghostwritten content. I was her ghostwriter. I was the chief engineer of the packaging, and I knew the first rule of her manufacture: never, ever reveal the process. The moment I made the decision to leave, I transitioned from a valuable asset to a dangerous liability. My knowledge, the proof of her artifice, became a ticking bomb. She didn't just fear losing an assistant. She feared losing the one person who could credibly dismantle her entire multi-million-dollar reality with a single, truthful accounting. The end of a working relationship with someone like Tara is never a simple resignation. It is a professional and existential threat. She feared exposure above all else, and she knew I held the proof of her fraud. The quiet work I did saving those emails was transforming into undeniable evidence. My filing cabinet was her confession. The final chilling confirmation that Tara viewed me as a threat, and not just as an employee, came 6 months before my departure. The illusion of our partnership, thin as it was about to be officially dissolved by a stack of legal documents. I had begun to quietly pull away, no longer volunteering for the 3 a.m. tasks, no longer offering my own creative ideas which she would invariably steal and claim as her own. I was building a wall, brick by brick, disengaging from the toxic dependency she fostered. And Tara, with the hypervigilance of a predator sensing its prey, is looking for an escape route, sensed the shift in my loyalty. I had started laying the groundwork for my own future, a small, ethical branding consultancy built on the very transparency I was forced to abandon in my day job. I told no one, but she must have sensed it. She called me into her pristine, white-on-white office, which always felt less like a workspace and more like a sterile, high-end interrogation room. Her high-priced lawyer, Mr. Finch, was there, a man who looked like a vulture in a bespoke suit, smiling a thin, reptilian smile. Tara was performing the role of the generous benefactor, all warmth and light, which was her most dangerous setting. She presented a thick stack of papers, bound in a custom leather folder, as a promotion. This was the contract trap. It wasn't a promotion. It was a set of golden handcuffs, designed to be a professional kill switch. I spent the next 48 hours, fueled by adrenaline and cheap coffee, dissecting the document. The small salary bump was negligible, a paltry 3% that wouldn't even cover inflation. The poison was buried in Section 4, a 5-year, post-employment intellectual property waiver. It was a brutal legal document, meticulously crafted to ensure my permanent, professional neutralization. It didn't just prevent me from competing in the wellness space. It claimed ownership of any concept, idea, or business strategy I developed, even on my own time, for 5 full years after my employment ended. It was an outright claim on my future thoughts. It was an act of intellectual slavery. I paid $500 I couldn't afford for a 30-minute consultation with an employment lawyer. His assessment was blunt. The clause was likely unenforceable in court, but it was designed to be a deterrent. He explained it was a scare tactic, a weapon she could use to bury me in legal fees until I gave up, whether the clause was legal or not. She wasn't trying to win in court. She was trying to ensure I never made it to court. I realized, with a cold knot of dread in my stomach, that this clause was designed specifically to give her a legal claim to the very consultancy I was planning to build. If I signed it, I would be professionally neutered. I chose not to sign. I didn't confront her. I simply continued to work, placing the unsigned document on my desk as a silent reminder of the precipice I was on. I accelerated my job search. Within 2 months, I had a firm offer from Zenith Marketing, an ethical, transparent firm that felt like a lifeline. I chose a quiet Tuesday morning, a day she had blocked out for a vibrational alignment retreat, which meant a spa day. I placed the unsigned contract on her desk, right next to my formal, 2-week notice of resignation. Her reaction was not the one I expected. There was no screaming, no performance of tears. Her smile vanished. Her passive aggression transformed into a quiet, ice-cold fury. She looked at me, then at the unsigned contract, and her eyes narrowed. She accused me, in a voice barely above a hiss, of strategic theft, stealing her proprietary secrets, and trying to weaponize her network against her. She made it clear that she saw my departure not as a career move, but as an act of war against her empire. She warned me, with profound malice, that she decided who won and who lost in the industry, and that she commanded 5 million followers. I stood there, my heart pounding, but I held her gaze. This was the moment of liberation, and it was terrifying. I walked out calmly, the sound of her quiet, venomous threats echoing in my ears. I knew I had just ignited a total war with a highly unstable, media-savvy narcissist. The true smoking gun, however, came the next day. Her manager, Mark, a man who was just as trapped as I had been, reached out to me. His communications, which I saved immediately and backed up on 3 separate drives, proved the subsequent attack was a calculated business decision, not an emotional reaction. Mark initially tried to broker a deal, urging me to sign a non-disclosure agreement and accept a small 5-figure severance. "Just walk away clean, Maya," he texted. "Don't poke the bear." This was a crucial piece of evidence, establishing her lack of good faith. She was trying to buy my silence. I refused. 2 hours later, Mark's communication became darker. He sent a final, chilling text. He relayed Tara's direct instructions. She was going live the next morning with a video. He explicitly stated that her numbers were flat for the quarter, and she needed a narrative to juice the engagement hard. He confirmed the strategy, quoting Tara, "Target Maya and spin the theft story." He ended the text with a line I will never forget. "She says the tribe loves betrayal content." That was it. It wasn't grief. It wasn't anger. It was marketing. Betrayal content, the cynicism of it was breathtaking. She was going to manufacture a villain to drive clicks, to sell her tonics and journals. My entire professional life, my reputation, my future, all of it was just raw material for her next content cycle. This single string of communication, saved from a manager's private phone, became the irrefutable receipt of premeditated financial malice. The next morning, the attack began. It wasn't a subtle escalation. It was a full-scale digital blitzkrieg, precisely as her manager had warned. Tara posted a 12-minute video titled, "The Truth About the Past 3 Years and My Betrayal." It was a masterpiece of performance art. She was sitting in her pristine, multi-million-dollar kitchen, but her hair was deliberately messy. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she dabbed at them with a tissue, ensuring the camera caught the single perfect tear that rolled down her cheek. She was raw, she was vulnerable, and she was a magnificent, terrifying liar. She never used my full name, of course. She didn't have to. The tribe knew who I was. She referred to me as my former assistant, M, the one person I trusted with my entire life. She then proceeded to assassinate my character with surgical precision, using language that was not just insulting, but legally actionable. She didn't offer opinions. She presented clear, verifiable lies as fact. She declared that I was a sociopath, a clinical, dehumanizing term, who had manipulated her for years. She claimed I had stolen client funds, a specific, criminal accusation designed to paint me as a felon. She alleged I was actively engaging in criminal fraud against her company, implying I had stolen her intellectual property to start my new venture. These weren't random insults. Her legal team had clearly chosen these words. To call someone mean is an opinion. To call them a thief or accuse them of fraud are statements of fact. They are libel per se, words so damaging that the law presumes you have suffered harm, making a lawsuit infinitely easier to win. She wasn't just venting. She was executing a legal strategy, believing her sheer size would prevent me from ever fighting back. The most insidious part was her call to action. She ended her performance by weeping, claiming she was terrified of what I might do next. She begged her audience, her troll army, to send positive light and seek justice against this danger. It was a masterful piece of plausible deniability. She wasn't telling them to attack me. She was asking them to seek justice, an ambiguous phrase she knew her mob would interpret as a direct order for digital, and perhaps physical, vigilantism. The sheer volume of views, 1 million in the first hour, was terrifying. The comments section exploded with thousands of messages of support for Tara and vitriolic, violent hatred for me. She had manufactured a villain, and her audience was sharpening their pitchforks. The backlash was swift, massive, and more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. Her followers, now a deputized mob, quickly pieced together the identifying details and found my small professional profile. Within 3 hours, my life was collapsing. My professional website, the one I had just launched for my new consultancy, was dosed. It wasn't just down, it was being suffocated. I sat there, hitting refresh, watching the browser time out, again and again, a digital representation of my future being choked to death. The site was flooded with thousands of fake, one-star reviews calling me a fraudster, a thief, and a sociopath. My personal email inbox, which I had foolishly linked to the site, was jammed with hundreds of graphic, detailed death threats. They weren't just anonymous rage. They were specific. "We know you live at the Avalon," one read. "We see you in the blue coat at the corner coffee shop. You deserve to be. The specifics are not worth repeating." My personal physical safety was gone. My digital identity was erased, replaced by this monstrous caricature she had created. I felt like a ghost, hunted by a mob that saw a monster I didn't recognize. My phone, which I had to turn off, was receiving a new blocked call every 30 seconds. I was forced to file 3 separate police reports, which the officers treated with a weary sense of futility. "We'll log it, ma'am," one told me. "But honestly, what can we do? It's the internet." The professional damage was immediate and financially crippling. The job offer from Zenith Marketing, my lifeline, was rescinded by noon the next day. The email wasn't even personal. It was from HR. It was cold, corporate, and utterly devastating. "Dear Miss Vance," it began, "due to unforeseen and high-profile controversy which has come to our attention, we must unfortunately rescind our offer of employment. We cannot move forward. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." That email was proof of her success. She had made me toxic. I was no longer a person. I was a high-profile controversy. The career I had sacrificed 3 years of my life to build, the future I was counting on, was incinerated in less than 24 hours by Tara's manufactured crisis. The damages were no longer theoretical. They were documented in the loss of a 6-figure salary, the thousands I'd already spent on my now-dead business, the cost of emergency legal consultation, and the necessity of immediate psychological support to handle the sheer volume of violent threat. I was alone, silent, and financially ruined. I sat in my now unsafe apartment, the curtains drawn, listening to my phone buzz on the table. This was the moment the vindication began. The fear didn't just paralyze me, it clarified everything. Tara had made one catastrophic mistake. She believed her betrayal content existed in the ethereal, lawless world of the internet. But the consequences, the lost job, the police reports, the financial ruin, were real, tangible, and most importantly, quantifiable. And I was holding the one thing that proved her entire performance was a lie. The text message from her manager, proving it was all a premeditated marketing strategy. It wasn't just evidence, it was motive. It was the proof of actual malice needed for a punitive damages case. That's when I knew that the only way to counteract a $50 million lie was with the cold, precise truth of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. The path to vindication lay in proving the $4 million cost of her malicious performance. When you are attacked by a celebrity who commands 5 million followers, the natural response is panic. The instinct is to beg, to plead, or to simply disappear. For the first 48 hours I was paralyzed by that fear, a ghost in my own apartment, watching the digital mob she had unleashed tear down my life, one hate comment at a time. But that fear, so cold and absolute, quickly hardened into something else, a cold, clarifying rage. Tara had not just insulted me, she had financially and professionally executed me for profit. I chose the opposite path. I chose the law. The law, I reasoned, is meticulous, slow, and utterly indifferent to follower counts. It is the perfect weapon against the theatrical chaos of the digital world. My first move was to find a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a shark. I spent 2 days combing through legal databases, not for social media lawyers, but for the most aggressive corporate litigation and defamation attorneys in the state. I found Mr. Chen. His reputation was not for being flashy or fast. It was for being a patient, methodical, and absolutely lethal cross-examiner who specialized in dismantling arrogant corporate defendants. I scraped together the last of my savings for his consultation fee, an amount that made me physically ill, but I knew that a cheap lawyer would be a faster death than no lawyer at all. I walked into his sterile, high-rise office carrying 2 items: a banker's box filled with every email, text, and note I had meticulously documented over 3 years, and the single most important piece of evidence, the text message from Mark detailing the juice, the engagement strategy. I laid out the story. The abuse, the IP waiver trap, the specific criminal accusations, the lost job, and the text message proving malice. Mr. Chen listened without interrupting, his face impassive. He reviewed the text from Mark, then read it a second time. When I finished, he didn't offer sympathy. He offered clarity. "This isn't a social media spat, Ms. Vance," he said, his voice calm and precise. "This is a tortious interference and defamation per se case with clear, provable actual malice." He explained the legal framework. We weren't just suing for hurt feelings. We were suing for quantifiable financial losses. He outlined the multi-pronged legal complaint defamation for the specific, false, and criminal accusations of fraud and theft. These, he explained, were per se claims, meaning the law automatically presumed damages. Interference with prospective economic advantage, for the direct loss of the Zenith marketing job, which he called the cleanest financial proof we had. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, TED, for the extreme and outrageous conduct of sicking a digital mob on me, which led to the police report. This, he warned, was the hardest to prove, but the death threats made it possible. But the most important part of his strategy was the fourth pillar, punitive damages. He explained that because we had the text message, the smoking gun, we could prove actual malice. This meant we weren't just asking for what I lost. We were asking the court to punish Tara for her conduct, an amount that would be tied to her net worth. "Compensatory damages make you whole," he said, steepling his fingers. "Punitive damages are what ensures she never ever does this to anyone else." This was no longer about getting my old life back. This was about making her pay for the life she destroyed. This initial meeting was the turning point, but it was also the start of a new kind of hell. The lawsuit wasn't filed the next day. Mr. Chen was clear. We would spend the next 3 months in a pre-litigation phase. "We file once," he said, "and we file perfectly." This phase was for gathering the rest of our evidence, solidifying my quantifiable damages, and preparing for the inevitable war of attrition. Filing the suit meant inviting her $1,000 an hour lawyers to scrutinize every corner of my life. I had to be ready. This phase was a profound, gut-wrenching financial and emotional commitment. The retainer for Chen's firm, just to start the process, drained my savings account to the last dollar. I was now completely broke, unemployed, and living on credit cards, all while betting on a legal battle that could take years. The ethical dilemma was agonizing. Spending my last dollars on a lawyer when I was functionally homeless felt reckless, yet the alternative was permanent professional erasure. The emotional toll was a constant, gnawing presence. I was forced to abandon my own apartment, which the mob had identified, and move in with a distant relative, a state of internal exile dictated by Tara's broadcast. The work was a grim inventory of digital violence. We spent weeks cataloging the specific threats, organizing them by date, severity, and the platform they originated from. I had to relive every vile message, not as a victim, but as a paralegal, coolly highlighting the ones that proved the mob was acting on her specific instruction. Mr. Chen required absolute psychological stability. I couldn't be a victim in his office. I had to be a client, objective, relentless, and focused only on the facts. The fundamental conflict of this phase lay in the contrast between Tara's flawless public narrative and my hidden reality. Every morning, Tara posted a sun-drenched video about vibrational alignment, while I sat at a borrowed desk, analyzing my credit score and compiling evidence of death threats. This juxtaposition was the profound injustice that fueled the need for accountability. The ultimate vindication was not to make her suffer, but to make the system work. With the initial complaint filed and the survival period behind me, the battle moved to the trenches of the discovery phase. This is the part of a lawsuit that no one sees, the part that doesn't make it into movies. It is a quiet, brutal, and excruciatingly slow war of attrition, fought entirely through paperwork. It is where the subpoena, the court's commanding order to compel evidence, becomes the ultimate weapon. Tara had conducted her entire malicious campaign using her digital devices, believing the cloud provided anonymity. Our goal was simple: to compel her to open that universe of private data to us. We were hunting for the paper trail she never thought would exist. Mr. Chen and his litigation team meticulously targeted every entity that held data on Tara's true motivations. This wasn't a blind search. It was a surgical strike. We issued a comprehensive series of subpoenas to her business manager, to her primary advertising network, to her email and cloud hosting services, and most critically, to the social media platform itself. We were not merely looking for text messages. We demanded metadata, timestamps, deleted communications, and internal corporate communication regarding her specific engagement goals and sponsor contract obligation. We knew that behind the glossy veil of creative content were hard, measurable business metrics, and we suspected she would only orchestrate such a public, self-damaging meltdown if those critical metrics were dangerously suffering. Tara's defense team, a massive, expensive firm paid for by her wellness's empire, fought every single subpoena with desperate vigor. This began a 2-month-long shadow legal war before we even got close to a trial. They filed motions to quash every request, claiming we were invading her personal privacy, attempting to steal trade secrets, her content strategy, and that our requests were a phishing expedition designed to harass her. They argued that her internal communications about her brand were protected by a commercial First Amendment right. Mr. Chen's response was a masterclass in legal precision. He successfully argued that the moment she published specific, verifiable lies about my criminal character, she legally waived any claim to privacy concerning the actual truth behind those malicious statements. You cannot, he argued to the judge in a scathing brief, accuse someone of criminal fraud in a public broadcast, leveraging your 5 million follower platform for reach, and then claim the evidence proving your motive is private. She made this a public matter, and the public has an interest in the truth. He systematically dismantled their trade secret argument by proving our requests were narrowly tailored to only the period surrounding the defamatory video. The judge agreed, and the subpoenas were ordered to be fulfilled. The electronic evidence arrived in massive, encrypted files. We spent weeks sifting through terabytes of data, endless, banal emails, scheduling conflicts, and drafts of vapid motivational quotes. It was a mind-numbing process designed to exhaust us, a digital haystack designed to hide the needle. But buried within the manager's texts, the advertising logs, and Tara's own draft emails were the 3 irrefutable pieces of evidence that proved her malice was calculated for direct financial profit. The first, which we already had, was Exhibit A, the text message from her manager Mark, now forensically confirmed from his phone. Tara had explicitly dictated the strategy to juice the engagement hard. Target Maya. We spin the theft story. This was the blueprint of the crime. This single text proved premeditation and actual malice. It vaporized her entire defense that she had just been emotional or lashing out in pain. In a court of law, this text was the equivalent of a signed confession. The second, And perhaps most damning was Exhibit B, her sponsorship contract addendum. We found it buried in a folder of accounting files. It was a signed amendment to her major supplement deal that stipulated a 20% bonus on the entire campaign if her channel's engagement rates increased by 15% within the first 7 days of the product launch. The defamation video launched the day before the campaign began. Her engagement spiked 30%. Her lie was a calculated, multi-million-dollar business maneuver. We could now draw a straight, undeniable line from the betrayal content to a massive financial payout. This exhibit proved the motive. It wasn't just malice. It was compensated malice, which any jury would find reprehensible. The third was Exhibit C, the pre-defamation NDA offer. We found a draft email from Tara to her lawyer, dated the day I resigned, but before the video was posted. It was saved in her drafts, never sent. It detailed an offer of $10,000 as a severance if I signed a full non-disclosure agreement. This was the final nail. If she truly believed I was a criminal thief, as she claimed online, she would have called the police, not her lawyer, to draft a hush money payment. This proved she knew her claims were false before she ever hit record. This was the proof of knowledge of falsity. These three exhibits, A, B, and C, were the iron foundation of our entire $4 million case. Tara, in her arrogance, believed her digital conversations were as fleeting as her spoken words. She didn't understand that digital natives operate under a dangerous myth, that because data lives in the cloud, it is airy, transient, and unrecoverable. She learned, the brutal way, that digital storage is merely a new form of permanent ledger. Every text, every calculated lie, every moment of malice is stamped with a date and time. And when placed under the unforgiving, impartial lens of the law, that data becomes permanent, irrefutable proof of malicious intent. We simply needed the court's authority to grant us access to read it. The deposition is not the trial, but it is often where the trial is won or lost. It is a mandatory, sworn testimony outside of court, conducted in a sterile conference room, recorded by a stenographer and a videographer. It is a meticulously crafted rehearsal where one side forces the other side to commit to their entire story, under oath. Tara was legally compelled to sit across from Mr. Chen for 2 full days and answer every question. She walked in viewing it as just another performance, an opportunity to charm and dominate the room. She was, however, unprepared for an audience of one. Mr. Chen, a man completely immune to her brand. She arrived with an entourage, her lawyer, Mr. Finch, 2 junior associates, and even a publicist who tried to sit in until Mr. Chen had him legally removed. Tara was dressed in what she likely considered serious as a severe, high-end business suit, hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She was enacting the role of the wounded, professional victim, sighing periodically and referring to the entire process as a distraction from her mission. Mr. Chen began the deposition not with an attack, but with a long, tedious, and deliberate process of establishing the groundwork. He spent 2 hours asking her to confirm her own credentials, her full legal name, the corporate structure of her empire, her revenue streams, her audience. This admission established foreseeability, a key component for the TAD claim. She was, in effect, admitting she knew her words had power. Then, he moved to the video itself. Tara, reverting to her performance, claimed she posted it only out of genuine, spontaneous emotional distresses and a moral obligation to warn her tribe. She claimed she was heartbroken and terrified. Mr. Chen let her speak for nearly an hour, allowing her to commit fully to this narrative of spontaneous emotional victimhood, locking her into her story. Then, he began the methodical disassembly of her sworn testimony, using her own words and evidence against her. He forced her to confirm, under oath, that she truly believed I had committed criminal fraud. She confirmed it. He then immediately introduced Exhibit C, the draft of the NDA offer. He asked her to reconcile under oath why she would offer a $10,000 payment for permanent silence to a woman she genuinely believed to be a dangerous, uncharged criminal. Her response was a panicked, rambling attempt to claim the offer was charity and compassion, which directly contradicted her sworn testimony of fear. Mr. Chen simply let her flounder, his face impassive, as her credibility began to unravel. The climax of the deposition came on day 2. Mr. Chen introduced Exhibit A, the text message. Juice the engagement hard. Target Maya. We spin the theft story. Tara's lawyer, Finch, objected furiously, claiming it was privileged, but Chen had already established the manager was a party to the business, not a private confidant. The objection was overruled. Mr. Chen forced Tara to read the text aloud. Her attempt to claim the text was a metaphor or a joke was met with cold, hard follow-up question. Ms. Hawthorne? Chen asked. Is it your testimony that spinning the theft story is a joke? Is targeting a former employee for betrayal content standard industry practice for you? Tara, for the first time, lost her composure, her voice rising, accusing Chen of twisting her words and not understanding the creative process. Her wellness queen mask was visibly cracking, replaced by the face of an arrogant CEO who had been caught. Then came the final nail. Exhibit B, the sponsorship contract addendum. Mr. Chen displayed the contract directly next to the analytics data, showing the 30% engagement spike. He forced her to admit she had signed the addendum, tying the bonus to the engagement increase. He compelled her to confirm that the defamatory video had, in fact, achieved the exact financial goal required by the contract. Tara was trapped, reduced to stammered admissions of coincidence. The performance was over. She left the deposition emotionally spent, having provided us with 2 days of sworn, documented testimony that proved her public victim narrative was nothing more than a cold, calculated business strategy aimed directly at me. The strategic victory was complete. Tara's ego had guaranteed the case would not settle, and we had her own sworn words ready to destroy her credibility in front of a jury. The trial began 9 months after the initial digital assault. This period of quiet, brutal legal warfare, the war of motions, subpoenas, and depositions, gave way to the theatrical, high-stakes arena of the courtroom. The room was packed. Every major media outlet and countless camera crews were present, eager to witness the collision between the glossy, curated illusion of the influencer economy and the stark, uncompromising reality of the American judicial system. Tara arrived, meticulously dressed in a severe, dark blue suit, a costume of seriousness. She was performing the role of the unjustly persecuted businesswoman. I sat next to Mr. Chen, who was quiet, composed, and utterly indifferent to the celebrity circus surrounding us. He was focused on the jury, 12 ordinary citizens who held my future in their hands. The next few weeks were not about proving I was merely a good person. They were exclusively about proving, with irrefutable, subpoenaed evidence, that Tara Hawthorne was a malicious, premeditated liar. Before the arguments even began, Judge Eaton set the stage with the meticulous instructions to the jury. He was a no-nonsense judge who clearly had no patience for celebrity. He spent an hour transforming complex legal statutes into actionable questions, reminding the jury that this case was not about feelings but about accountability. He meticulously defined the elements of defamation, libel, reminding them that they must find the statement was published, demonstrably false, and caused damage. Crucially, he spent extensive time on the required standards. He explained actual malice not as simple spite, but as the legal definition of publishing a lie, knowing it was false, or acting with a reckless disregard for the truth. He defined intentional infliction of emotional distress, TED, requiring conduct that was extreme and outrageous, so far beyond the bounds of decency that it would shock the conscience of a civilized community. His clinical recitation narrowed the jury's focus. They were judging a malicious business strategy, not a celebrity's bad mood. Tara's lead counsel, Mr. Harrington, delivered a smooth, aggressive, and strategically manipulative opening statement. He attempted to paint Tara as a visionary entrepreneur, a victim of corporate espionage, and a woman who had simply reacted emotionally to a profound personal betrayal. The core of their argument was a deliberate misrepresentation of the law. They claimed Tara's statements were merely subjective opinions, protected by the First Amendment, shared with her audience in a moment of emotional duress. He framed the case as a cynical attempt by a disgruntled former employee to exploit a celebrity's fame for an undeserved payout, appealing directly to the jury's sympathy while avoiding the documented facts of the case. He portrayed me as a disloyal opportunist and Tara as the creative genius who was simply protecting her life's work. Ms. Hawthorne, he argued, gives her entire life to her audience. She is a pillar of wellness. This lawsuit is a malicious attempt to tear down a good woman. It was a performance designed to muddy the waters, to make the jury forget the cold, hard text messages and focus on Tara's crocodile tears. Mr. Chen's opening argument was the precise antidote to the defense's chaos. He did not speak about feelings. He spoke only about receipts. He stood before the jury and, with a calm, almost academic precision, laid out the timeline of a corporate execution. He presented the case not as a drama, but as a simple, premeditated business transaction. Tara needed an engagement spike to unlock a huge financial bonus. I refused the IP waiver. Therefore, Tara launched a calculated attack for profit. He introduced the three core exhibits: the NDA offer, Exhibit C, the juice engagement text, Exhibit A, and the sponsorship bonus contract, Exhibit B, as the holy trinity of malice. This case is not about free speech, he told the jury, his voice filling the quiet room. It is about fraud. It is about an employer who, when faced with a flatlining quarter, chose to manufacture a villain to drive clicks. She didn't just defame Ms. Vance. She monetized the defamation. He held up the exhibits. We have her motive in Exhibit B, the contract. We have her premeditation in Exhibit A, the text. And we have her knowledge of the lie in Exhibit C, the offer to buy Ms. Vance's silence before the attack began. He concluded by reminding the jury their duty was to hold the defendant accountable for using her platform as a weapon, prioritizing the law over popularity. The contrast was stark. The defense offered a confusing, emotional narrative of grief, while Mr. Chen offered a clear, irrefutable narrative of documented greed and deliberate deceit. The first part of Mr. Chen's case was establishing the fact. The second part was establishing the damage. To do that, I had to take the stand. This was the moment I had dreaded for 9 months. Not because I was afraid of the truth, but because I was terrified of facing her. Tara was sitting at the defense table, perhaps 20 feet away, watching me. She wasn't looking at me with anger. She was looking at me with a kind of bored, reptilian indifference, scribbling notes to her lawyer, Mr. Harrington. That look, more than any threat, was designed to communicate my irrelevance. She was performing for the jury, a powerful CEO bothered by a gnat. Mr. Chen had prepared me for this. Do not look at her, he had instructed. Look at me, or look at the jury. She is irrelevant. Only the facts matter. I took the stand, my hands shaking so badly I had to clasp them in my lap, digging my nails into my palms. The court clerk administered the oath. I do. My voice was a whisper, and the judge asked me to speak up. Mr. Chen began his direct examination. His tone was gentle, almost academic. He was building a foundation for the jury. He started with my background. My degree, my $80,000 in student debt, my ambition, and the day I was hired. He had me describe the early days, the excitement, and then, slowly, the shift in the environment. He had me detail the 80-hour work weeks, the 2 a.m. phone calls, the constant, low-level psychological abuse. I recounted the incident with the vegan catering, where she had accused me of vibrational misalignment, a phrase that sounded so ridiculous in the solemn courtroom that a few jurors actually frowned, confused. Miss Vance, Chen asked, his voice steady, can you describe the document presented to you approximately 6 months before your resignation? I detailed the IP waiver contract. I explained in simple terms how the clause would have given Tara ownership of my thoughts for 5 years after I left. It wasn't a non-compete, I told the jury, my voice gaining strength. A non-compete stops you from working for a rival. This stopped me from thinking for myself. It said any concept, idea, or strategy I developed, even in my own home, would be her property. It was a non-creation clause. It was designed to ensure I could never be her equal, that I would remain her intellectual property forever. Mr. Chen then walked me through the resignation. What was Miss Hawthorne's demeanor when you gave your 2 weeks' notice? She was furious, I said. She wasn't sad. She was cold. She told me I was committing strategic theft. She told me I was ungrateful, and that she had made me. She told me she decided who won and who lost in this industry. And she told me she had 5 million followers, and that I paused, my voice catching, that I had nothing. This was the prelude. Mr. Chen then moved to the attack itself. Ms. Vance, what happened the day after that resignation? I described the text from Mark, the manager. Mr. Harrington, Tara's lawyer, shot up from his seat. Objection. Hearsay. Your Honor, Mr. Chen countered smoothly. This goes directly to the defendant's state of mind and proves premeditation. It is the core of the actual malice claim. Overruled, the judge said. The jury will hear it. I recounted the text message, word for word, the one I had memorized. She's going live. Her numbers are flat. She needs to juice the engagement hard. She's spinning the theft story. She says the tribe loves betrayal content. The jury was visibly stunned. A man in the front row, a high school teacher, just shook his head. The cynicism of it, betrayal content, hung in the air. Mr. Chen then proceeded to the damages. He projected the video on the large courtroom screen. I was forced to watch it again, to hear her call me a sociopath, a thief, and a criminal. I had to listen as she wept for the camera, performing the ultimate betrayal. Miss Vance, Chen asked, what happened after that video was posted? This was the heart of my testimony. My life ended, I said, my voice finally breaking, not with sadness, but with the memory of the sheer terror. Within 1 hour my inbox was flooded, not with criticism, but with violent threats. My website was dosed. It was gone. Mr. Chen, we are now presenting Plaintiff's Exhibit D1. Ms. Vance, can you identify this? It was the email from Zenith Marketing. It's the email from HR Chair, rescinding my job offer. Please read the reason stated. It says, due to unforeseen and high-profile controversy which has come to our attention, we must unfortunately rescind our offer of employment. Mr. Chen. So, to be clear, less than 24 hours after Ms. Hawthorne posted her video, your 6-figure job offer was gone? Yes. And what about the other damages? I had to detail the next few weeks. I described the thousands of fake 1-star reviews that made my consultancy business, which I'd invested $5,000 to start, instantly toxic. I described the phone calls, the blocked numbers, ringing at all hours. I had to change my number, I explained, but for days, it was a constant stream of ringing, buzzing, people screaming thief and sociopath into my voicemail. I described the specifics of the threats. They weren't just, I'm going to get you. They were detailed. They described my appearance, my blue coat I wore every day. They described my apartment building, which I later learned was in a background shot of one of Tara's old Instagram stories. Mr. Chen introduced exhibits D2, D3, and D4, the police reports I had filed. Ms. Vance, why did you leave your apartment? Please read the reason stated. It says, due to unforeseen and high-profile controversy which has come to our attention, we must unfortunately rescind our offer of employment. Mr. Chen. So, to be clear, less than 24 hours after Ms. Hawthorne posted her video, your 6-figure job offer was gone? Yes. And what about the other damages? I had to detail the next few weeks. I described the thousands of fake 1-star reviews that made my consultancy business, which I'd invested $5,000 to start, instantly toxic. I described the phone calls, the blocked numbers, ringing at all hours. I had to change my number, I explained, but for days, it was a constant stream of ringing, buzzing, people screaming thief and sociopath into my voicemail. I described the specifics of the threats. They weren't just "I'm going to get you." They were detailed. They described my appearance, my blue coat I wore every day. They described my apartment building, which I later learned was in a background shot of one of Tara's old Instagram stories. Mr. Chen introduced exhibits D2, D3, and D4, the police reports I had filed. "Ms. Vance, why did you leave your apartment?" "My address was posted in the comments section of her video," I testified. "Someone posted a picture of my front door. I was terrified. I fled. I took a backpack and left. I moved in with a relative in another state." He then put up the invoices. The therapy bills, the cost of the emergency move, the cost of the new security system. He was meticulously, line by line, building the compensatory damages. Finally, he addressed the 2ED claim. "Ms. Vance, how did this campaign affect you personally?" This was the hardest part. I had to describe the insomnia, the panic attacks that would wake me up at 3 a.m., convinced someone was outside my door. I had to describe the paranoia, the fact that I couldn't be in a public space without scanning for faces, terrified one of her tribe would recognize me and seek justice. I had to admit, under oath, that her actions had broken something inside me, that I, a once confident professional, was now afraid of my own shadow. She didn't just cost me a job, I concluded, looking at the jury for the first time. She took my name. She took my safety. And she did it for engagement. She did it to sell supplements. My entire life was just content for her. Mr. Chen walked back to his table. "No further questions, Your Honor." The jury was silent. Mr. Harrington, Tara's lawyer, stood up, a predatory smile on his face. "Just a few questions, Ms. Vance," he began. The cross-examination had begun, and I was alone. Mr. Chen sat down. The courtroom was silent, absorbing the weight of the testimony. The jury had just seen the emails, the police reports, and the text message proving malice. I had held it together, just barely. But the reprieve lasted only a second. Mr. Harrington, Tara's lead counsel, stood up. He was a tall man who wore his expensive suit like armor. Where Mr. Chen was precise and academic, Harrington was a performer. He used a kind of aggressive theatrical charm, and he smiled at me as he approached the podium. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator. "Good afternoon, Ms. Vance," he began, his voice smooth and friendly. "Just a few questions. You testified that you worked for Ms. Hawthorne for 3 years, correct?" "Yes." "And in that time, she promoted you twice and doubled your salary, didn't she?" "She took you, a fresh graduate, and gave you an executive-level career, correct?" "Objection, Mr. Chen said calmly. "Relevance. Counsel is characterizing. It speaks directly to the witness's credibility and potential motive, Your Honor." Harrington shot back. "I'll allow it, but be brief, counsel." "She did increase my salary," I said, "in exchange for a workload that became 80 hours a week, including weekends and holidays." "Aha," Harrington said, pouncing. "So you were unhappy? You were resentful of her success. Resentful that this woman, this visionary, was making millions while you were scheduling?" This was his first tactic. Paint the victim as the villain. Mr. Chen had warned me this was coming. He had drilled me for hours on this exact line of questioning. "Do not get emotional." Chen's voice echoed in my head. "Do not defend. Just answer the facts." "I was a professional," I stated calmly. "I did my job, and I did it well. Her success was, in part, based on my work." "You did your job so well, in fact, that you decided to start your own company, didn't you?" "A company, Miss Vance, that looked strikingly similar to Miss Hawthorne's." "A branding consultancy?" "Objection." Chen was on his feet again. "Counsel is testifying, and he is mischaracterizing the facts. There is no evidence of similarity." Sustained. "Mr. Harrington, ask a question." Harrington smiled. The damage was done. He had planted the seed. I was the thief. "Isn't it true, Miss Vance," Harrington continued, "that you refused to sign a standard employment contract? The one she gave all her executives?" It was not a standard contract, I said, holding my ground. It was a post-employment IP waiver that my own lawyer advised was likely unenforceable. It demanded ownership of my ideas for 5 years after I left. So, you were planning to steal her ideas? No, I said firmly. I was planning to have my own. That contract was designed to prevent me from ever working in this industry again. I refused to sign it, and I resigned. Harrington changed tactics. Minimize the damage. So, after you resigned, Ms. Hawthorne posted a video. You testified that this video hurt your feelings? The condescension in his voice was thick. I could see a few jurors stiffen at his tone. It didn't hurt my feelings, I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. It cost me my career. It cost me my 6-figure job offer from Zenith Marketing. Ah, yes, the job offer, Harrington said, walking toward the jury. But you have no proof that the video was the reason, do you? They just said high-profile controversy. That could mean anything, couldn't it? It could mean they just didn't like you. The offer was rescinded less than 24 hours after her video went live. The email cited the controversy. It was the only controversy. But Ms. Hawthorne has no control over Zenith Marketing, does she? She didn't call them and tell them to fire you, did she? She has control over her audience, I countered. She has control over her words. She told 5 million people I was a criminal. This was the core of the TED claim, and Harrington had walked right into it. Aha! Her audience! Harrington yelled, performing for the jury. Ms. Hawthorne is not responsible for what a few trolls on the internet do, is she? You're suing her for what other people wrote. Are you going to sue every single person who left you a mean comment? This was his most dangerous argument. Chen had warned me that the jury might get confused by this. You must link Tara's action directly to the mob's reaction, he had said. Foreseeability. Mr. Harrington, I said, my voice steady. When you tell 5 million people that a specific person is a sociopath and a thief, and then tell them to seek justice, the resulting threats are not an accident. They are a direct, foreseeable consequence of her action. She pointed the gun. Her followers pulled the trigger. Harrington did not like that answer. He stalked back to his table, shuffled some papers, and moved to his final attack. Blame the victim's motive. Ms. Vance, you're asking this jury for $4 million, correct? I'm asking for compensatory damages for the money I lost, and punitive damages for her malice. Yes. $4 million. He said it slowly, letting the number hang in the air, painting me as greedy. Isn't it true that this entire lawsuit, this whole story, is just a payday for you? You saw an opportunity to get rich, to take down a successful woman, and you took it. My blood was boiling. I thought about the nights I'd spent terrified, the therapy bills, the humiliation. I looked at Chen. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Now, Mr. Harrington, I said, leaning forward, for 3 months, I was hunted by her mob. I lost my job, my apartment, and my reputation. But the real difference is this. Tara Hawthorne posted her video and made hundreds of thousands of dollars in ad revenue and sponsor bonuses from it. She monetized my destruction. I'm asking this jury for what the law allows to cover the damage she chose to inflict for profit. This isn't a payday for me. This is accountability for her. Harrington stared at me. His performative smile was gone. He had no follow-up. He had expected me to be a tearful, emotional victim. He had not expected me to be a client who had memorized the receipt. No further questions, he mumbled, and sat down. I let out a breath I knew I was holding. I felt vindicated. The hardest part was over. I had survived, and I had told the truth. If my testimony was the emotional heart of the case, the next phase was the cold, hard spine. Mr. Chen called his expert witnesses. In a defamation trial, experts are the ones who translate, she said, into math and metadata. They are the ones who prove that a lie isn't just a lie. It's a liability. The first expert on the stand was Mr. Alistair Thorne, a senior forensic accountant with 30 years of experience tracking corporate fraud. He didn't look like a TV lawyer. He looked like a librarian who could destroy you with a spreadsheet. He walked to the stand carrying a thick binder, the financial autopsy of Tara Hawthorne's empire. Mr. Chen didn't waste time. He pulled up Exhibit B, the sponsorship bonus contract, on the main projector screen. Mr. Thorne, Chen asked, can you explain to the jury the financial state of Miss Hawthorne's company in the quarter leading up to the video? Thorne adjusted his glasses. It was precarious, he said flatly. Operating costs were up 40% due to a failed expansion into activewear. Cash reserves were critically low. Ms. Hawthorne needed a significant infusion of liquid capital, and she needed it immediately. He then pointed to the contract. This agreement with the supplement company, VitaLife, was that lifeline. But it had a catch, a performance trigger. To unlock the full payout, a bonus of nearly $800,000, aims-3. Hawthorne's channel needed to achieve a 15% engagement rate within the first week of the campaign. And what was her average engagement rate prior to this? Chen asked. Stagnant, Thorne replied, hovering at roughly 8%. Why? Historically, she had never jumped more than 2% in a single week without a viral event. So, statistically speaking, Chen pressed, was it possible for her to hit that 15% target through normal organic content? Highly unlikely. Virtually impossible. Chen then overlaid the analytics graph from the week of the attack. It was a flat line that suddenly spiked into a vertical mountain. And what happened on October 14th, the day the defamation video was posted? Engagement spiked to 30%. Thorne testified. It was an immediate, massive surge. The video generated 3 million views in 24 hours. The comment section activity increased by 4,000%. This data carried over directly into the VitaLife campaign launch the very next day. So, in your expert opinion, Mr. Thorne, did the defamatory video serve a financial purpose? Unquestionably, Thorne stated, looking directly at the jury. The video was a necessary input to trigger the bonus clause. Without the manufactured controversy involving Ms. Vance, Ms. Hawthorne would have missed the target and lost nearly $1 million. The defamation was not an emotional outburst. It was a business asset. Tara stared at the table. The jury wasn't looking at her anymore. They were looking at the graph. The blue line of her engagement spike looked less like success and more like a weapon. Next came the digital forensics specialist, Dr. Eris Vance, no relation. If Thorne proved the greed, Dr. Vance proved the intent. He was there to authenticate Exhibit A, the engagement text, and to analyze the cybermob. Chen focused first on the text message. The defense had tried to argue that Tara sent that text after she posted the video, as a reaction to the views. Dr. Vance destroyed that timeline. I have extracted the metadata from the device, Dr. Vance explained, pointing to a timestamp on the screen. This message, "We spin the theft story," was created and sent at 8:42 a.m. on Tuesday. The video was filmed at 10:00 a.m. and uploaded at 1:00 p.m. The instruction to create the narrative preceded the creation of the content. So the theft story was planned before she even turned on the camera? Yes. The metadata confirms premeditation. Then, Chen pivoted to the intentional infliction of emotional distress, TEDG, claim. He needed to prove that Tara's actions created a foreseeable danger. Dr. Vance, you analyzed the traffic patterns of the harassment received by the plaintiff. Was this normal internet trolling? No, Dr. Vance said. This was a coordinated attack. We tracked the origin of the threats. Within minutes of Ms. Hawthorne's video ending, we saw a synchronized wave of traffic moving from her Instagram page directly to Ms. Vance's business website. We identified specific keywords used by Ms. Hawthorne, sociopath, thief, being repeated verbatim in thousands of one-star reviews and emails. Is it possible this was random? Statistically impossible. This is what we call a directed energy event in network analysis. Ms. Hawthorne pointed the audience at a specific target, gave them the keywords to use, and they executed the command. The death threats, the DDoSing, these were the direct algorithmic result of her call to action. The testimony was devastating. It stripped away the influencer veneer and revealed the mechanics of the mob. Tara wasn't a girl sharing her feelings. She was a general ordering an airstrike. The defense had no real cross-examination. They tried to argue about margin of error on the timestamps, but it sounded desperate. The math didn't lie. The metadata didn't lie. And as the experts stepped down, I realized we had done something rare. We had captured the ghost in the machine. We had proved, mathematically, that her outrage was fake, but her profits were real. The evidence was closed. The experts had packed up their charts, and the witnesses had all left the stand. Now came the final act of the theater, closing arguments. But before the lawyers could speak, Judge Eaton had to speak. He had to give the jury instructions, a phase of the trial that is often glossed over, but is actually the most critical. This is where the judge draws the map that the jury must follow. Judge Eaton looked tired but sharp. He turned to the 12 men and women in the box and began to read. He didn't use layman's terms. He used the cold, hard language of the statute. He explained that to find Tara liable for defamation, they had to find that her statements were false assertions of fact, not just hyperbole. But the real weight came when he defined actual malice. You must find, the judge instructed, that the defendant acted with knowledge that the statement was false, or with reckless disregard of whether it was false or not. Reckless disregard means the defendant entertained serious doubts as to the truth of her publication. He then moved to the intentional infliction of emotional distress. You must find that the conduct was extreme and outrageous. Conduct so outrageous in character and so extreme in degree as to go beyond all possible bounds of decency, and to be regarded as atrocious and utterly intolerable in a civilized community. Sitting there, listening to him define the boundaries of civilized community, I realized that the internet had long ago erased those boundaries. We were asking this jury to redraw them. Then Mr. Harrington stood up for the defense. His closing argument was a masterclass in gaslighting. He didn't talk about the text messages. He didn't talk about the bonus contract. He talked about freedom. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrington began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "this case isn't about a text message sent in frustration. It isn't about a contract. It's about the right of a woman, a self-made, successful woman, to share her life with her community. Tara Hawthorne is an open book. That is her brand. That is her heart. When she felt betrayed by Ms. Vance, she turned to the only support system she has ever known, her audience." He walked back and forth, painting Tara as the victim of her own success. "Miss Vance wants you to believe that Tara is a mastermind. But the truth is simpler. Tara is human. She was hurt. She lashed out. And now Ms. Vance sees an opportunity. She sees a winning lottery ticket. If you punish Tara for speaking her emotional truth, you silence every person who has ever vented about a bad boss or a bad employee. You set a precedent that says if you have followers, you lose your First Amendment rights. Do not let Ms. Vance monetize Tara's pain. It was slick. It was dangerous. He was trying to make the jury feel that punishing Tara was un-American. Then Mr. Chen stood up. He didn't walk around. He didn't whisper. He walked to the podium, placed his hands on the wood, and looked at the jury for a long, silent 10 seconds. "Mr. Harrington talks about emotional truth," Chen began, his voice cutting through the room like a razor. "But we are in a court of law, and in this room, we deal in actual truth." He pointed to the empty witness chair. "You heard Miss Hawthorne testify. You heard her admit she offered Miss Vance $10,000 to stay silent. Ask yourselves, do you pay hush money to a thief? Do you offer a severance package to a sociopath? No? Why? You call the police. The only reason to offer that money is because you know you are lying, and you want to buy the cover-up." Chen then grabbed Exhibit A, the text message, and held it up. It was blown up on a poster board. "Emotional distress?" Chen asked, reading the text. "Juice the engagement hard. Spin the theft story. Ladies and gentlemen, those are not the words of a heartbroken woman. Those are the words of a marketing executive planning a campaign. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She was looking for a Q3 revenue spike." He moved to the final crushing point on punitive damages. Miss Hawthorne is wealthy. She is powerful. If you fine her a few $1,000s, she will laugh. She will write it off as a business expense. She will do it again. The law allows for punitive damages not to compensate the victim, but to punish the aggressor. To send a message that says, you cannot use a human being as kindling for your engagement fire. You cannot destroy a life just to sell supplements. You must return a verdict that echoes. A verdict that tells the influencers of the world that the truth still costs something. He sat down. The room felt heavier, smaller. The air was sucked out of it. The theater was over. Now the 12 strangers had to decide if the law was strong enough to pierce the bubble of a celebrity. The bailiff closed the heavy oak door behind the last juror, and the room exhaled. The trial was paused. The evidence was frozen in time. Now the machinery of justice was entirely in the hands of 12 strangers who had spent 3 weeks listening to the dissection of my life. The waiting period of a jury deliberation is a unique kind of purgatory. It is a vacuum of silence where time seems to warp. Tara and her team retreated to a private conference room. Even through the glass, I could see her pacing, talking rapidly into her phone, likely managing her narrative in real time. She was still trying to spin the story, even while the verdict on the truth was being written. I sat on a wooden bench in the hallway, staring at the scuff marks on the floor, trying to breathe. Mr. Chen sat beside me, reading a newspaper, the picture of calm. How long? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. If they believe the text, Chen said without looking up, it will be fast. If they are fighting about the First Amendment, it could be days. In a case like this, speed is the enemy of the defendant. We waited. 1 hour. 2 hours. At the 4-hour mark, Tara's team ordered lunch, a massive spread of catered food that seemed grotesque in the sterile hallway. They were settling in for a siege. But at the 5-hour mark, the door to the jury room opened. The bailiff stepped out. He didn't look at us. He walked straight to the clerk's desk and whispered something. The clerk nodded and picked up the phone. Mr. Chen folded his newspaper. They're back, he said. 5 hours. That is a lightning strike. We filed back into the courtroom. The air was different now. Thicker, charged with electricity. Tara took her seat. She looked annoyed, as if the jury had interrupted her lunch. She checked her watch. She still didn't get it. She didn't understand that 5 hours meant the jury hadn't struggled. They hadn't debated. They had agreed. The jurors walked in single file. I scanned their faces, looking for a sign, a glance, anything. They were stone-faced. But as they took their seats, I noticed something that made my heart stop. Not a single one of them looked at Tara. They stared straight ahead at the judge, or down at their hands. In the language of the courtroom, that is the kiss of death. You do not look the person in the eye when you are about to destroy them. Judge Eaton took the bench. He looked out over the court. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson, a middle-aged man who worked in logistics, stood up. He held a single sheet of paper. We have, Your Honor. Please publish the verdict. The clerk took the paper. She cleared her throat. The silence in that room was absolute. It was a silence so deep you could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the scratch of a pen, the beating of my own heart. In the matter of Vance v. Hawthorne, the clerk read, on the count of defamation, we the jury find in favor of the plaintiff, Maya Vance. Tara's head snapped back as if she'd been slapped. A sharp intake of breath came from her publicist. But the clerk wasn't finished. On the count of intentional infliction of emotional distress, we find in favor of the plaintiff. On the count of intentional interference with economic advantage, we find in favor of the plaintiff. It was a clean sweep. Every lie, every attack, every manipulation rejected. But the verdict is just words. The justice is in the numbers. We award the plaintiff compensatory damages, the clerk read, in the amount of $2,500,000. I closed my eyes. That was everything. That was the lost salary, the lost business, the therapy, the security costs, the debt. It was my life, paid back in full. And, the clerk continued, raising her voice slightly, Finding that the defendant acted with actual malice, fraud, and oppression, we award punitive damages in the amount of—" She paused. Tara was gripping the table, her knuckles white. $1,500,000. Wow. Total judgment. $4 million. The gavel slammed down, sealing the number into history. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Tara let out a sound I will never forget. Not a cry, but a gasp of pure, incredulous shock. She turned to Mr. Harrington, her eyes wide, mouthing the word, "4." She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because for the first time in her life, she couldn't delete the comment. She couldn't block the user. She couldn't spin the narrative. The law had looked at her empire of authenticity and stamped it with a $4 million price tag that read, "Fraud." Mr. Roy Chen turned to me. He didn't smile. He just nodded. "It's over, Maya. You got the receipts." As the deputies moved to clear the court, I watched Tara. She was arguing with her lawyer, her face twisted in ugly, raw anger. The mask of the wellness queen was gone. There was no ring light to save her now. She looked small. She looked ordinary. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't afraid of her. $4 million. It was a number that made headlines around the world. "Influencer liable for millions," the banners read. The end of the Wild West of social media. But the check was just the beginning of her ruin. The verdict acted as a signal flare to the corporate world. The finding of actual malice, the legal confirmation that she was a liar, triggered the morals clauses in every single one of her sponsorship contracts. Within 48 hours of the verdict, Vitalife, the supplement company, terminated their partnership and sued her to recover the bonus she had fraudulently obtained. Her activewear line was dropped by the retailer. Her book deal was suspended. The tribe, realizing they had been weaponized for profit, turned on her. Her follower count didn't just drop. It collapsed. The comments section she had used to destroy me became the instrument of her own isolation. 6 months later, Tara Hawthorne filed for bankruptcy. Her sprawling California estate, the backdrop for so many of her lies, was sold in a distressed sale to cover the judgment and her own massive legal fees. The empire was gone. The wellness queen was dethroned, not by a troll, but by the truth. I used the money to rebuild. I paid off my student loans. I bought a house with a front door that no one recognizes. And I started my consultancy this time, with a reputation forged in fire. Clients didn't hire me because I was Tara's assistant. They hired me because I was the woman who beat her. This story, the texts, the contracts, the verdict is now closed. It is filed away in the archives of justice. But it serves as a permanent warning. It proves that the rules of the real world still apply in the digital one. It proves that the keyboard is not a shield, and a follower count is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Every text you send, every video you post, every malicious lie you tell for profit, it creates a receipt. And in the end, justice doesn't care about your trending topic. It only cares about the receipts. This has been File 2 of the Vindication Logs. We are building a library of justice here. A collection of stories about people who were pushed to the edge by tyrants, bullies, and frauds, and who found the courage and the evidence to push back. We want to hear from you. What did you think of the jury's decision? Was $4 million enough, or did she deserve more? What is the greatest danger in the influencer economy? The greed of the creator, or the blind faith of the audience? Comment below. Your insight helps us uncover the truth. And if you have your own story, a time when you were underestimated, betrayed, or targeted, and you found the perfect way to turn the tables, we want to know. Submit your story to the confidential email in the description. You could be the next file we open. We are already investigating the next case. It involves a Hoa president, a stolen property line, and a drone that caught everything on camera. You won't want to miss it. So, if you believe that the truth is the ultimate weapon, subscribe to the Vindication Logs and click that notification bell. Join us as we continue to expose the liars and celebrate the victories of the underdog. Until next time, keep your head down, keep your record spotless, and never ever let them see you coming.